Episode 6, Endure. For the quick tip, we're going to talk about BCAAs. Are they junk or nah? For our main topic, we're going to talk about endurance. We want to talk about endurance and what does it mean to endure in all arenas of your life. For our first random topic, we're going to discuss, I'm going to take a few moments to try and encourage you all a little bit. There are a lot of things going on out there, but there's also a lot of reasons for us to be optimistic, right? And for our second random topic of this episode, I want to talk about what I call purpose and legacy. It's a little bit of a dive into fatherhood. What's going on, everybody? I hope you're doing well out there. Listen, I'm Coach Evan. This is Say Cheese and Lift Studio, and you're listening to the S.C.A.L Method Podcast, your one-stop shop for not only physical fitness, but mental, emotional, and spiritual fitness. Let's go. Branch chain amino acids. What are they? Right? Okay, so first, before I get into what they are, let me cover a few ground rules first. Rule number 1, or maybe, rule sounds a little bit too structured for a quick tip. Whatever. It's point number 1. I am not a doctor, okay? So don't take any of this as a doctor's advice, especially when it comes to supplementation, okay? Ask your general practitioner, ask your doctor whether this thing is particularly good for you or not. Well, in this case, branch chain amino acids, BCAAs, aminos. Ask your doctor, because I am not a doctor, okay? 2, a lot of the advice I give is based on my client's experience and based on my experience, okay? So a lot of this stuff is experiential, if I said that word correctly, but it is also it also stems from years and years of read studies. So I'll read the studies on certain supplementation, right, or certain exercise modalities, and so I'll look for the studies and I'll gather the data and gather the information, and then I'll make my best judgment in interpretation thereof. I will also go to additional doctors who do this for a living and ask their advice. My advice basically comes from research and experience. So it's a nice little combination of both, okay? And the last thing really is just I often experiment. So I will often, it's with myself, right? I don't experiment with my clients. I experiment with myself. Well, sometimes I experiment. Depends on, anyway, I often will experiment with myself when it comes to certain supplementation, because rarely do I suggest supplementation to my clients, okay? So those are pretty much like the 3, again, they're not ground rules, whatever, but they're like 3 points to keep in mind. How about that? So, branch chain amino acids, what are they, right? They first and foremost, they break down into 3 things. There are 3 items, 3 nutrients that your body does not produce, right? So you have to get them from external sources, right? So you have leucine, isoleucine, and valine, right? Those 3, once again, you got to get them from outside. You got to get them from actual supplementation or from your food, right? From your food. And they don't break down. So they break down in your muscles. They don't break down in your liver like other nutrients tend to do. So this one is a little bit different. So what do they do here, right? So they promote muscle building especially leucine. They help promote muscle energy, right? So they kind of give you an energy boost. That would especially be with isoleucine. And they help regulate blood sugar, or they could help regulate blood sugar, and that's especially with valine, right? Also, in addition to all that, they also could help in post-workout recovery, especially as it pertains to the DOMs. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, as it pertains to the DOMs. And they also boost exercise performance. Okay. I myself have taken BCAAs for years, on and off for years, and I've run, a few experiments on myself with them. And what I found them not to be junk. Okay, right? Even though there seems to be some trend going on, or there was a trend going on saying that BCAAs are trash, and I never really found them to be trash, but they do have very specific uses, right? In some cases, they're not going to be as helpful to you, and in others, they might be pretty good for you. So one of the main reasons for using for supplementing with BCAAs is to kind of bridge the gap in your diet. Okay, and what do I mean by that? And honestly, I actually mean most of this advice for active people. I need y'all working out. Right, I don't, I don't suggest. I would not advise taking BCAAs outside of anything that you get in your food if you're not active. This is kind of, for active people only here, right? I would suggest using BCAAs to kind of make up the gap in your diet. Now, what do I mean by that? To kind of explain it a little bit, I have to dig a little bit deeper into like the big kahuna here. That's leucine. Leucine is the muscle building amino, right? It's the one that seems to jumpstart protein synthesis, or building up these proteins so that you can build up the muscles and and get jacked, or not lose any lean tissue, right? So leucine basically is, like I said, it's the muscle building amino. It just sounds so weird saying that, but it's the muscle building nutrient. That's the way. Now that sounds official. It's the muscle building nutrient that basically you get with any of your foods, basically. So like when you're talking about like a high quality protein source, what usually makes it a high quality protein source is the amount of leucine that it has in it. Now, there's a little caveat with all of this. You can't take leucine by itself. Apparently, and there were a few studies that I looked into that said that, or that showed that taking leucine by itself pretty much doesn't really do anything past what you think it would do. I guess maybe that's too wordy, but it's basically like it doesn't do anything. Right? So it has to be all in balance, which makes perfect sense, right? Like the body in general operates based on balance, rhythm and balance, right? At least that's the way I see it. So it makes sense that you can't just take leucine by itself and expect to, just gain all of this muscle. But at the end of the day, there's a certain amount of leucine that you get from a certain amount of protein, right? So protein breaks down into those branched chain amino acids. And with, I think it was like every 25 to 30 grams of protein, you get, or is it 30 to 35? It's something like that. So 25 to 35 grams of protein, you get around 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine, which is actually what's required to break this quote unquote leucine threshold. And that's just the point at which you jumpstart and you kind of turn on muscle protein synthesis. Now, I know this is all, I don't want to get that deep into the weeds with all of this, but I just wanted to drop that there for you so that you can kind of like, you could do your own research, absolutely. What I found was that there were a bunch of, kind of warring camps, as with everything, it seems like now, where one side says the leucine threshold is a myth, the other side says that the leucine threshold is something like a miracle. Like, just I through studies and through actual real life experience, I could tell you that there's a better chance that there is a leucine threshold than not. In order to hit that leucine threshold and promote protein synthesis, you're going to need to get 25 to 35 grams of protein per meal. If you're not getting that, then it's a good idea to supplement with BCAAs, because then that'll get you to that protein synthesis, spike, if you want to call it that. Now, this includes, two specific groups of people that I'm kind of speaking to right now at the moment, right? So one, if you're cutting and you're not getting as many calories in, like for maybe show prep or something like that, BCAA supplementation is great. It'll be great for you, because that'll allow you to still crack that leucine threshold without eating too much food or without consuming so much protein, right? And even on the other side of that, if you're bulking and you're already going to have to take in a whole boatload of carbs, but then as you're already kind of stuffed, you're going to have to take in some protein as well. It would be helpful to supplement with BCAAs to kind of lower the amount of protein that's required on that end, so that your stomach and your intestines aren't doing the Argentine tango. Now, next, the second reason why I think BCAAs are probably more likely legit than not, or not junk, is because it helps out with workout recovery and eases some of the symptoms of the DOMS. So I've used them for years, like I said before, and what I found was that when I stopped using them, I was a lot more sore after my workouts, and I just really didn't recover as well. So I couldn't get back into it with the same intensity as I would have liked, right? And the DOMS thing, that's real. I'm sorry, because look, especially after a leg day, especially after doing hamstrings on a leg day. Oh, yeah. The BCAAs come in very, very, very handy there. Okay. Now, again, this is what's worked for me. This is what's worked for a few of my clients. Several of my clients. And this is what's also backed up by a few studies that have been done just in terms of athletes and how they recover from their workouts and how sore they feel and so on and so forth. So how I use them and how many of my clients use them, again, it's to bridge that gap in their diet. So if you're cutting and you're finding it difficult to get 25 to 35 grams of protein per meal. And in all honesty, I saw a few studies that actually say that you want to front load that. So you might want to aim for like 35, 45 grams of protein for breakfast, easy on lunch, and then bump it back up for dinner. But maybe we're getting too complicated here. So let's just say 25, 35 grams of protein per meal. If you find it difficult to make it there, then 5 grams, 6 grams of BCAAs in conjunction with your meal kind of gets you to that point, because the goal here is to preserve, when you're cutting, is to preserve as much lean tissue as possible. No matter what stage you are in life, no matter if you're 65 years old or 22 years old, if you're cutting, the main idea here is to make sure that you can drop the fat without outcutting lean muscle tissue, right? You want to spare as much of your lean muscle as possible. That is what's going to get you there, right? So like a lot of people who end up doing these yo-yo diets and all that fun stuff, they end up dropping the weight really fast, and then they gain the weight back again, because when they initially drop that weight, they're not dropping the fat, they're dropping the actual tool that's used to lose the weight, which is the lean muscle. So they're dropping like somewhere like 50-50, like 50% fat, 50% lean muscle. That is a bad ratio. It's not a good ratio at all. You're basically taking away any future opportunities to maintain your health by taking away your lean muscle tissue. And at some point in time, I'm probably going to have to do just a lean muscle tissue episode, because it's important, especially as you get older, as you age. Once you cross over 40, things change. Things are different. I wish somebody told me that. But anyway, things become very, very different. And the focus should be different then. The focus should be on maintaining as much lean muscle and or building up some lean muscle tissue, right? So when you're trying to cut some fat, you want to spare the lean muscle, you want to add in some BCAAs in your diet. And that's typically what I end up doing. The next thing, I'll do BCAAs, and this is an idea, like how to use them. You want to kind of use them around your workouts, okay? Just a little bit, maybe 5-6 grams before your workout, right? Now, I know some people tend to, put it in a drink and drink it during. I, believe it or not, haven't found that much. Now, for some people, it made no difference. Others, they definitely had to drink it before the workout. Just in terms of the amount of soreness that they felt afterwards. Okay. No one seemed to, and I didn't feel this myself either. No one seemed to get an exercise like performance boost from them. So it doesn't seem to be that great of a performance boosting supplement. That's not saying that it couldn't be. I haven't seen it. Okay. But those are the ways, the reasons. That's how you would do it. So it's just like, put it in your pre-workout if you want to, depending on how long it takes for you to get your pre-workout in. Get the whole pre-workout in before you work out, have some BCAAs in it, and then just go to town, right? So those are the two ways that I would do it, right? To bridge the gap in my diet. So if I'm not getting enough protein in each meal, then I want to supplement with it then, and supplement with it before a workout. It'll help ease up some of that soreness that I can't stand, but gotten used to, but just not on the hamstrings. So that's the quick tip. All right. So BCAAs, not junk. Man, 2024 has been crazy, y'all. Not only has it been crazy, like it's been like all the things that have been going on in the world this year alone, they not only seem crazy, but they seem almost abnormal. There's just weird things going on, right? And then, that's the stuff in the world. And in my own personal life, I think we've had enough drama and craziness to fill the next 5 years. And this year isn't even over yet, right? And it's just interesting because it seems like thing after thing after thing, it just keeps happening. It keeps piling on, and it's just crazy. And you got to handle it or move through it or work through it. Or it's just so many things going on. And I have a lot of people, because, I ask advice. I ask what people think in some of these instances, rather. And a lot of people say, I need to slow down. I need to slow down. I need to relax. Look, even my mama says I need to relax. And, if mama says it, then it's advisable to listen. unless she not make her famous mac and cheese come Thanksgiving. That would be a problem. But yeah, I mean, I've even had some people paint the picture that I need to beef up in my faith a little bit, because there are more things and more occurrences and more situations that I ought to give to God and let God handle things. So I need to become more faithful to give these things to God. That whole let go and let God thing. And yeah, I don't see it that way. I see it as, so here's what I know. Okay. I know there is a time and a place for everything. Everything comes in its due season, right? So understanding that, there's another thing that I know, that I ought to walk through this life with some level of discernment, being able to tell, first of all, good from evil, but being able to tell the truth from the not true, being able to tell the path that I ought to walk and the path that I ought to avoid, right? So two things right there, right? I need discernment, and there's a time and a place for everything. And with that conclusion, I basically came to a point where it's just like, I don't think I need to give anything up. I don't think I need to rest. I don't think I need to pause or stop. I think I simply need to get stronger. And there are many events that have happened up to this point already that kind of bear that out. Okay. But not only do I need to get stronger, I think through a lot of these situations, I simply need to endure. So that's where this topic comes from. All right. Not only do I need to endure, but I want to be able to help you all beef up your endurance. Okay. So it might seem strange that I start with this first, but I'm going to start with physical endurance training first, and you'll see why in a little bit. Okay, so what is, let's in a general sense, what is endurance? Now let me go to my I have the whole little definition written out here, and I don't want to botch it. So so endurance is the ability to continue or last despite fatigue, stress, or other adverse conditions. It's also the ability to bear pain and hardships. So, if you remember a few episodes ago, I talked about this idea of strategic discomfort, right? And basically what that was saying was we ought to get uncomfortable on purpose, right? So that idea is it goes hand in hand with this idea of enduring, of endurance, right? Because how do you build endurance if you don't have anything to endure, right? So strategic discomfort basically allows you to set up a situation in which you have to endure so you can get better at enduring, right? And I want you to keep in mind here that the way I'm presenting it as there is a difference between endurance and stamina. They're not the same thing to me. So let me just break it down. When I say endurance, I say continuing on that energy output while in those adverse conditions. Stamina is what you have before you hit any adverse conditions. Okay? So it's basically a measure of the energy output before you're tired in a physical sense. And the endurance is basically you're tired, how much are you going on? So I see physical endurance in two separate categories here. So the first category is basically cardiovascular endurance, or aerobic endurance. And that's basically just measuring the ability of your heart and your lungs to supply blood to your muscles, or supply oxygen to your muscles, right? And then there's muscular endurance or anaerobic endurance, and that's just the ability for your muscles to continue to contract in adverse conditions. Both of these items are over a certain period or an extended period of time, meaning we're like for the cardiovascular one or the aerobic one, we're measuring, or that's your ability for your heart and your lungs to provide oxygen to your muscles over a period of time, an extended period of time, right? That's the endurance, and that's key, right? And the same thing for the muscular endurance. That's the ability for your muscles to continue to contract over a certain period in time or an extended period of time. Okay? So in both instances, both aerobically and anaerobically, to improve upon your physical endurance, you have to, and this is why I started with this one, you have to set your body up in a position in which it has to endure. And then you increase the adverse conditions incrementally, strategically, over time, forcing your body to adapt. Now, that was a lot of words. That was a lot of verbiage there, right? But at the end of the day, you basically to say it in a short way, you want a program that's going to challenge you and test your physical endurance out, and then force your body to endure longer each time. That's it. So like an example would be like for the cardiovascular side or the aerobic side, like you could do two versions of cardio, whatever. You could do HIIT, high intensity interval training. And if you were doing that, you basically would say like, hey, okay, I'm going to do 8 20-second high intensity somethings. Okay. And I'll do that for 2 weeks. And then on that third week, I'm going to do 10 20-second somethings. And then I'll slowly progress from there, right, as you know, we go along, thereby increasing the total amount of time that you're operating at high intensity, right? If you were to increase your aerobic endurance doing low intensity steady state, go for a 20-minute something, and the next couple weeks or the third week after that or something like that, go for a 25-minute something, and then the one after that, go for a 30-minute something. Just basically, again, just increasing the amount of time you're doing that thing. So in the first example, you're increasing the amount of time that you're at high intensity. In this example, you're increasing the amount of time that you're operating at the lower heart rate, but you're going, further distances or further, for a longer time or what have you, right? And again, both of those will force your body to adapt, right? That's the key word here. Very, very key word here. Adaptation, okay? So, and if you wanted to do the muscular endurance, you pick an exercise. You take a guess as to what I'm going to pick. If you guess bicep curls, you're spot on. So we're guessing bicep curls. So if you did bicep curls, right, and you basically would do a few sets of 20 plus reps, and then the next week or the next 2 weeks you would do 5 sets or something like that at a light weight, of course, right? Or you could do something called AMRAP, as many reps as possible. So you get a little program going on. 1 week you get your baseline set of bicep curls, and I can knock out 25 bicep curls straight before everything sets in. And the next week I might want to go to, say, like 28 bicep curls. And then the week after that, 32 bicep curls. And trying to get to that point where I'm slowly increasing the amount of reps I do, or in the previous example, slowly increasing the amount of sets I do over time. But the overall main point here is to set your body up in selectively adverse conditions and force your body to adapt so that those initial adverse conditions are not adverse anymore, thereby increasing your workload. Okay? That is physical endurance in a nutshell, right? Now, remember, there are a few ideas here that I want you to keep in mind, right? We're setting our body up in adverse conditions. The adverse conditions are absolutely required for endurance, right? Another thing that's required for endurance is time. Now, this very same notion applies to mental endurance, okay? So what is mental endurance? Mental endurance is the ability to think clearly and think rationally in times of prolonged hardship or stress. Let me say that again. It is the ability to think clearly and rationally during times of prolonged hardship or stress. Now, building up mental endurance here is very important. It's very important because building up your mental endurance also builds up your physical endurance, right? Because what you think will become what you do, right? Building up your mental endurance also builds up your emotional endurance, because what you think becomes how you feel. So to build mental endurance, you have to consider your setup. So first and foremost, life is going to throw enough at you for you to be able to get some practice in. Let's just say that. Right? So what you really want to do is to work on your critical thinking skills. And truthfully, that's non-negotiable. You got to beef up your critical thinking, right? You got to look at things for what they are, keep it all factual, and without any regards to how you feel about it, right? We'll deal with the feeling part in a little bit, but up front, think about what it is and keep it 100. Keep it 100 with yourself as you're thinking about this. Again, that's non-negotiable. That's absolutely required. Work on the critical thinking, right? Especially during those times of hardships and pain and adverse conditions, right? The next portion that you would want to work on is your consistency. So first part, and remember, we're still talking about your thinking, okay? So you want to, in order to build up that mental endurance, you want to be pretty skilled at critical thinking, 1. 2, you want to be consistent with that, right? Doing something once is one thing. Doing something for like 100 days is a completely different thing. So you want to be consistent and not only just doing the critical thinking, but consistent in your thinking. And that's saying another thing as well, right? Keep in mind, if you're doing the critical thinking and you're keeping it all factual and you're consistent with keeping your thinking factual, that is setting you up in a better position. And from that, you'll get a whole bunch of small victories along the way, right? But it really goes back to, and it stems from your critical thinking, right? And let me break that down for you really quick. So critical thinking is the ability to question, acknowledge, and test previously held assumptions, to recognize ambiguity, to examine, to interpret, to evaluate, to reason, and to reflect, right? All of that is covered under critical thinking. So the better you can do that stuff, and the more consistent you are with that stuff, the more consistent you are with your thinking, the better you are at mentally enduring hardships and trials. And a little offshoot of that would be to work on uh, visualization, right? So it kind of works hand in hand with your critical thinking a little bit, but you got to be able to see something on the other side of your issues, on the other side of the hardships, on the other side of all the pain, right? You have to be able to visualize to see what it's like on the other side, because then that becomes your goal that you're kind of aiming at, right? So now your actions are going to be kind of lined up to achieve that particular goal, and your thinking is going to be lined up in that way as well. So it helps tremendously to visualize. You got to be able to see it. You got to be able to see where you're going here, right? So otherwise you're stuck and you're sitting in the middle of this hardship, or you're sitting in the middle of this pain, and there's no end in sight. That's not how you get better. So you got to see something on the other side. You have to be able to visualize something better on the other side. You have to visualize that other side. Hey, I'll get through this. Hey, I'll get over that hurdle. I'll get over this hump. I'll get through this roadblock, right? You have to be able to see the other side. So some of the people that I've seen who have like some of the greatest like mental endurance typically are athletes, right? And they have to, right? Even in training, a lot of athletes, a lot of the best athletes set themselves up in adverse conditions physically in order to mentally endure. And that's it's so interesting. So there's another thing. That's what it's like, where like life is not just throwing things at you, but you're setting yourself up. You're applying the principle of strategic discomfort by setting yourself up in these adverse conditions and doing what you do in those adverse conditions, right? So like from an athletic perspective, one guy comes to mind, and I always found that he was, I followed him years ago, and every now and again I'll see what he's doing. David Goggins. I mean, he cuss a lot, but that's somebody who I would say has mental endurance, and he plays no games with it. It's literally life or death for him, and he continuously sets himself up in adverse conditions and forces his body to adapt, but it forces his mind to adapt. Like it's that is probably the perfect example of mental endurance. Okay, now you could also set up a situation where you're doing like cognitive, like structured cognitive exercises under stress, right? Like, and that's something that I've seen a couple things, and I've seen studies, like psychological studies that say that could work, that could benefit you. I tend to just work out, and that's enough for my mental endurance. But I did hear and I did see, actually in a handful of studies, now that I think about it, people doing different like puzzles and doing different structured like writing exercises and things like that under like extreme conditions, like in extreme heat or extreme cold, or so there's an idea there too, so that it forces you to kind of be able to think clearly in regular adverse conditions that are maybe not so extreme. but yeah, so that would be mental endurance. Now next up, emotional endurance. What is emotional endurance? Okay. Emotional endurance is the ability to tolerate emotions of a certain intensity or certain moods during the ups and downs of life, right? So you're better able to handle those extreme emotions, or any emotion really. And the thing is, like, emotional endurance makes you more self-aware. Emotional endurance not only makes you more self-aware, it makes you more likely to achieve certain outcomes. Okay. So like, you have that ability with emotional endurance. You have the ability to level set during times of heightened emotion. Okay. And that can be happiness or sadness or anger. It could be any of the emotions. Also, you're less like you'll have that ability with emotional endurance. You'll have that ability to kind of, lock in, right? Instead of fantasizing about doomsday scenarios, as an example, right? And of course, over prolonged periods of time, right? But the more you do it, the easier it becomes. This is one of those things. The more you're able to handle your or tolerate these heightened emotions and still keep it pushing, so to speak, the easier it becomes, and the more ability you have to manage your emotions over the long term, right? So to build emotional endurance, first things first, you have to pay attention, right? So you have to understand what you're feeling when you're feeling it, right? That comes right back down to emotional intelligence once again. Now, I'm not going to go dig into it too deep. I mean, I've already grazed over it for like 2 episodes of the podcast. If you want, go back to those episodes. Okay, of course, go back to A Sound Heart, and go back to when I talk about. Actually, it was a random topic when I was talking about empathy as a as a weapon of mass destruction. Go back to those 2 segments, and I talk about emotional intelligence there. So I'm not going to go into too much detail with it, but it's very important in gaining and building emotional endurance. EI is good for building EE. That was corny. And just like what's required for mental endurance, you have to kind of see the other side of the struggle, right? You have to be forward thinking, right? And you use that as an option to, first of all, it changes your thinking, but it also changes how you feel. Where it's like, okay, this won't last forever. It might last a long time, but it ain't going to last forever. And there is another side to this, right? I'm going to get on the other side of this hurdle here. And one thing I noticed about people who lack emotional endurance, they often either live in the past or they live in the what ifs of the future. But either way, they typically are stuck. And then a quick note about the actual emotion, right? So I said happiness and sadness. So could cause you to, err, right? So, and it was like, well, how does happiness, right? So happiness, sadness, anger, and any extreme, right? Any extreme version of any of that stuff can alter your decision making, right? And not only can it alter your decision making too much, if it's too extreme, if you're like extremely happy, too happy, you're disconnected from reality. If you're too sad, a little really, really sad, you're disconnected from reality. If you're angry, but like too angry, you're disconnected from reality, right? So the emotional endurance is the ability to tolerate all of the extreme emotions, but the emotions in all of its degrees, and still proceed without like getting stuck because of how you feel. Now, finally, what is spiritual endurance? Okay. So spiritual endurance is the ability to work through pain, hardships, and trials while leaning on God for strength without wavering in your faith and without compromising on what is true. And I know that's a mouthful, but let me break it down again. I'll say it one more time. I'm sorry, not emotional. Spiritual endurance is the ability to work through pain, hardships, and trials while leaning on God for strength, without wavering in your faith and without compromising on what is true. Now, that comes from a lot of different verses in the Bible. It is either, endurance is talked about a lot, whether it's in form of steadfastness or patience, long suffering. Endurance is spoken about or written about quite a bit in a number of different verses. And actually, one sharply comes to mind, Hebrews 12:1. And that, you know what, let me bring that up. Hebrews 12:1, and I always pull from the King James Version. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. And then thinking about it, that also kind of that reminds me of another verse that can go in conjunction with that. It's Romans 5 verses 3. I'll just start with Romans 5:3. And not only so, but we glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience, endurance, and patience, endurance, experience, and experience, hope. So let me just read that without me adding my little thing in there, right? So, and not only so, but we glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience, experience, and experience, hope. Okay, those two verses come to mind pretty sharply when I think of spiritual endurance, right? So the question then is, how do you build spiritual endurance? And I'm not going to I'm not going to read every single Bible verse, but I have I have a few, okay? And they say a couple things, right? So Romans 12:12 says that you are to rejoice in hope, remain patient during the trials, and always be in prayer. That pretty much is self-explanatory. So it's almost like I'll get to that. And James 4:7 says, it tells us to resist the devil, to resist evil, resist the temptation to do evil. Right. And then James 1:2-3 basically tells us to be joyful for the testing of your faith. Okay, so those are building spiritual endurance is, in terms of the instructions to do it, very short instructions, kind of tough to do though, right? But that's what it is really. So you want to invite stay away from evil, enjoy the process of taking on these trials, which is another hard thing to do. And continue to lean on God for strength without compromise and without wavering. And that's how you build up spiritual endurance. Now, that covers all of it. That is how we are to endure. Now, hopefully I give you enough to go off of there. I gave you chock full of stuff. So get the exercising. Like literally get exercising. Physically, get out there and get active, right? But mentally, get active. Emotionally, get active. Spiritually, get active, right? And that's how you build up. That's how you force your body, your mind, your heart, and your soul to adapt, right? We're trying to force these adaptations so that we can grow, so that we can withstand these things for longer periods of time. All right. So hopefully this helps. and we'll be moving on. All right, let's get out there and beef up our endurance, though. So earlier in this episode, or well, for the bulk of this episode, I was talking about endurance, right? And the idea of enduring hardships, enduring trials, enduring pain, enduring the fatigue, and all that fun stuff. And I started off by saying that 2024 has been kind of a rough year, right? And I mean, it has been. It has been. And, in America right now, we are in another election cycle. And especially as of late, those things don't turn out to be the most fun. Let's put it that way. And this one is no different. Maybe it's not as bad as it was 4 years ago, or maybe it's not as bad as then. But you still see a lot of different groups going against each other, combating each other. And then you see things like what is going on in the UK. Look, I don't know enough. First of all, don't live there, so I don't know what's going on over there. But just a couple people talk to, a couple other people who live over there. Things don't sound so great over there right now. We have this thing going on with Israel and Gaza and Russia. Ukraine is still a thing too. And then there's some things going on with things like countries in Africa too. So like there's stuff going on everywhere you go, everywhere you look. There's something happening. There's something blowing up, or there's something falling apart. And I wanted to kind of take this time, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but I want to take this time to basically say, hey, still, in the face of all this stuff, remain optimistic, okay? And if there's ever really, and I know how it sounds, because like I also kind of partially say this to Christians as well, like specifically, if there was ever a case for Christianity, here it is, right? Because with Christianity, with real Christianity, you have hope, and you can look at these things and not fall apart. You can experience these things and not completely just lose yourself, right? And I think about this often, and I kind of went back to my man Vodi Bakum. Now I know he's a little controversial at times, but I've listened to a lot of his sermons, and we'll just leave it at that, right? But there's this one thing that he recently preached about. And it was that very thing, optimism. You got to be optimistic, right? And he explained a situation in which the children of Israel were split. Well, they were split. So there were people in Judah who were basically sent into exile. And they were basically ruled over by Babylon. And, they were sent into exile into Babylon, and they were just like, all right, well, we're only supposed to be here. There are some people, rather felonious people, kind of saying that, hey, we're only going to be here for like 2 years, right? And then come to find out they were there for like 60 something years, close to 70 years. So a little off, but they believed that they weren't going to be in exile that long. And a message came from God to Jeremiah at that point in time, and was basically like, nah, y'all gonna be here for a while, essentially. Because it was kind of implied, because he was like, God basically said through Jeremiah, like, nah, and I think this was a letter too, but God was basically like, nah, listen, y'all gonna have to build some roots here. Y'all gonna have to take wives, have kids. y'all gonna be here for a while, basically, right? And on top of that, they were pretty much directed to pray for the goodness, I guess, of Babylon, right? They were supposed to pray for their captors, essentially, because the better they were doing, the better the Babylon was doing, basically, the better that the ones who were taken and put into exile are going to do. And I was just like, so that's basically the way that God sustained them during exile. And it's just interesting because there are some, modern day parallels to that. My man Vody was preaching about it, and it brought a lot of things to light for me, right? It made me look at things with a slightly different perspective, because right now it is very easy to look at everything that's going on and just have this completely negative view of the world and completely negative view of life as we know it. Like, the most common phrase is, well, with all these storms and with all this political turmoil and with all this stuff going on overseas, and did you see what happened at the Olympics, that opening ceremony, and that in the closing ceremony, what are we doing? It was like, and then all of a sudden the Church of England is not the Church of England anymore. There's a whole bunch of different things that people point out. Rarely do we hear about any of the positive stuff that's going on. That is definitely going on. And so you got to be mindful of these things, right? So it's just like, be mindful of the stuff that you listen to, consume, absorb on a consistent basis, right? Because in some way, shape, or form, that will detract from your hope. That will detract from the positive stuff. Now, I'm not saying be unrealistically positive, right? I understand a lot of these situations. Some of them I don't have any clue about, but I understand the difference between right and wrong, right? I can spot the morally corrupt versus the morally strong standing, or the morally astute. I don't know how you want to put that, but I can tell the difference, right? Now I can see there are a lot of weird things happening right now. I get it, but I still have hope. And again, that's the case for Christianity, right? Like, if you don't have that hope, if you're not offered that hope, then what's the point in any of this stuff, right? So this message is partially to Christians, partially to my non-Christian people too, right? But it's just like, to Christians, it's just like, you should be the stalwart of hope. Right? Because you should be the one who basically is just like, look, this person is consistently optimistic. Everybody that you're connected to, and hopefully you're connected to people who are not just Christians, right? Like, everybody should be looking to you for that optimism. You should be the light, right? You shouldn't get to the point where you're you turn it into woe was me and woe was us, and this is the end of the world. Because for all we know, we're just getting put into exile. But ultimately we'll be sustained. But that's only if you have that hope, right? Yeah, so I don't want to take too much time, because I know I took a long time with these other two topics beforehand. So I just wanted to drop off, just remain optimistic. Continue to have hope. Continue to cultivate that hope. Continue to be that person that everybody knows is just like, no matter what, they look at the bright side of these things, right? And don't do it in a way that's completely unrealistic, but do it in a way that's actually true. Like, hey, you know what? Things aren't over yet. And understand that certain things that are probably happening because certain people that need to turn to God. Maybe not. But at the end of the day, you should still have that hope, and that should lead to your optimism. All right. So next up, I want to talk about legacy and purpose. This really stems from thinking about fatherhood again, right? Because I'm a dad. But I heard this very interesting quote from this one guy on YouTube. He says something like he was talking about, and I'm trying to remember exactly how it broke down. Because honestly, this topic I want to dig into a little bit differently as an episode itself. Right. So this is really just me rapping right now. This isn't anything formal and I don't really have anything like set up. It's just something I saw, to be completely honest with you, something I saw this morning that made me think a little bit, that piqued my interest. So there's this one guy on YouTube that just randomly was just searching through things and everything like that, going through my main feed. And he was talking about just the importance of fathers in general, right? And I was listening to him and everything like that. But he said this very interesting. He made this interesting statement, whereas like the father to the father, their son or sons, that's their legacy, and to the son, their father, until they actually step up into manhood, their father is their purpose. And I'm like, that is a very interesting way of putting it. So when he said it, I gotta find a video. At least so I can stop saying like he and give you some links or something to work off of. But this one guy, he was basically explaining about how he grew up with his dad, and his dad passed away recently, and it did a number on him, and understandably so. It's a hard thing to lose any family member, right? It's definitely hard for a son to lose his father, especially if he's a good father, right? I just found it interesting because he said he found his purpose in kind of like, the way I interpreted it was like kind of making his dad proud. So that was his purpose, to make him proud. So he would do the things that would basically make him proud. And and that situation works if your dad is a good dad, right? If they're teaching and guiding you to be to eventually grow up into a man who is full of integrity, an honorable man, that's actually pretty decent to say, like, my purpose is to make him proud. Because in order to do that, you have to become a man full of integrity, an honorable man. So it works in that case. And then the flip side is, it's just like, hey, look, you have sons, from the father's perspective, have sons. And then this is where I also kind of look and I'm like, yeah, I have two boys, and I look at them. I don't necessarily look at them as my legacy, but I guess I've been thinking about it all day, all day today, where it's just like, maybe they are my legacy. Like they continue the name, of course, but how they are right now and what they turn out to be kind of is a reflection off of my parenting. Not just my parenting, right? But a large part of my guidance has to do with whether they are full of integrity or honorable men in the future. So man has struggled over, like, throughout all of history with that idea of legacy. What are you leaving behind, right? What are you leaving behind that ultimately is going to do good for the world, do good for humanity, do good for or do good in the name of Christ, right? Again, this by now. If you don't, well, you should, right? I'm a Christian, so that's the way I look at it. That's my perspective, right? And it's interesting because, I mean, that's exactly what legacy is. And I never concerned myself with legacy until I started thinking of it that way, where, I mean, my boys are my legacy. So when I'm not here anymore, whenever that is, right? They're going to continue on. They are going to continue on with the guidance and the tutelage that I've given them, and hopefully do great things. Hopefully do wonderful, non-corrupted things, right? And yeah, and it just makes me think even more. And again, I'm just rapping right now. I'm just rapping, but it really has me in this state of thinking where it's like, not that I necessarily want to change my way of parenting or anything like that, but it adds a different spice to it now. It adds a different flavor to parenting now. It adds a different flavor to being a father now. You know, I think a little bit more about legacy than I did before. And maybe that's also a sign of just getting older, which I am not doing, because I don't age ever. Anyway, I don't want this to turn into a ramble fest, and I do want to dig into those ideas a little bit more. And again, there's this. It'll probably be a part of the episode where I'm talking about biblical manhood, right? That is just, I'm forming that episode, but I'm giving it time because I want to be very careful about what I say for that. But as far as this, it's just legacy and purpose. My boys are my legacy, and I am their purpose for right now. And then as they get older and have their own families and hopefully have their own families and everything like that, they'll be their son's purpose, right? And also, please don't hear what I'm not saying here. I'm talking about fatherhood, and I'm talking about fatherhood as it pertains to sons. I don't have any daughters, so I can't really speak of that. I'm not saying that daughters can't be a father's legacy. I'm not saying anything like that at all. So again, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm just talking about fathers and sons, because that's specifically that's my situation. Okay. It's a very, very, looking at, I almost like fatherhood more now, understanding it that way too. I don't know. So, I mean, look, here's an opportunity. What do y'all think, right? What do my dads out there think, right? Like, are your kids your legacy? Do you see them as that, or do you see them something differently? Like, and are you their purpose? Right? Or is that weird, right? Like, 'cause I can vibe with that idea. Just let me know what you think. All right. So, yeah, that's it. I just wanted to wrap with you a little bit. We'll talk about it a little bit more in depth later on. But it's a very interesting idea: legacy and purpose. Woo! Well, there you have it. That is episode 6. Another one. I think I always say it. Another one in the books, right? That's episode 6. This one was a doozy. I just looked at the runtime immediately as I was speaking towards the end of the main topic, and I'm like, ooh. But I'm not going to have a long drawn out outro or whatever. Listen, I'm Coach Evan. This is St. Cheeseless Studio, and you just got finished listening to the S.C.A.L Method Podcast, your one-stop shop for physical fitness, mental fitness, emotional fitness, and spiritual fitness. We'll see y'all